When the train finally pulled into Berlin, the city smelled of smoke and oil. Allied bombers had struck the outskirts the night before. Entire blocks still smoldered. Yet the people moved with mechanical discipline. Women in uniform, children collecting debris, officers shouting orders that vanished into the echo of air raid sirens. Andrea stepped onto the platform, adjusting his grey coat. He was no longer Ukrainian, no longer Andreas Holub. He was Andreas Hahn, an engineer loyal to the Führer. He spotted her almost instantly. Elsa Kraus stood by a newspaper kiosk, her blonde hair tucked neatly under a wool beret, a faint scar cutting across her cheek. She looked like any other German woman, efficient, composed, unremarkable. But when her gaze met his, there was a flicker of recognition. She approached without a word, handed him a folded copy of Welkische Beobachter, and whispered, "Welcome to the heart of darkness, Herr Hahn." Inside the newspaper was a tram ticket and a coded address. No smiles, no small talk, just orders. That night, Andrei arrived at a small apartment in Kreuzberg. Sparse furniture, blackout curtains, a radio hidden inside a bread box. He unpacked his tools, miniature transmitter, cipher sheets, false passports, and placed them with ritual precision. Berlin outside hummed like a wounded machine. Somewhere in the distance, anti-aircraft guns roared. Andrea lit a cigarette, though he rarely smoked. The first drag filled his lungs with bitterness. On the table lay Elsa's instructions written in invisible ink that appeared only under heat. Primary contact, the professor, physicist involved in V2 program. Objective, obtain design sketches, coordinates of Peenemünde facility. Transmission schedule, Thursdays 0200. Signal phrase, the engine sings in winter. He read it twice, then burned the paper. The first week passed in observation. Andreas, posing as a consultant, visited factories and airfields, pretending to inspect production chains. His forged credentials opened doors. He spoke with engineers, memorized layouts, and noted every train heading towards Peenemünde. Each night, he transmitted fragments of data back to Moscow. Each signal lasted no more than 30 seconds. He lived between fear and focus, never sleeping more than 3 hours, never trusting a sound behind the door. One evening, as he left the factory, Elsa appeared in the crowd. She slipped beside him, her voice calm and quiet. "They're watching you already." He froze. "Don't react," she added. "Just listen. There's talk in the Abwehr of a foreign technician, someone who doesn't fit the mold. You've been efficient, maybe too efficient." Andrea kept walking, his pulse hammering. "Why are you helping me?" he asked under his breath. Elsa didn't look at him. "Because the Reich is dying, and I refuse to die with it." They crossed a bridge, a searchlight swept the sky. The sound of bombers echoed in the distance. For the first time, Andrea saw a flicker of something behind her composure. Exhaustion, fear, maybe guilt. He wanted to ask who she really was, but the question lodged in his throat. That night, he tuned his radio again. The Morse key clicked. "The engine sings in winter." Static replied. Then a faint signal answered in Russian. Gray shadow acknowledged. Andreas exhaled. The mission had begun.
Berlin, April 1943. The city lived in twilight, half shadow, half flame. Every night the air raid sirens wailed like ghosts, and every morning people rose from the rubble to act as if life had never stopped. For Andreas Hahn, to everyone around him, this rhythm became the pulse of survival. He walked the same route each day from his apartment to the Siemens aviation plant in Spandau. The guards checked his papers with perfunctory discipline. No one questioned a man who spoke flawless German and carried letters signed by officials from the Ministry of Armaments. His hands were always steady, his eyes unremarkable, his manners precise. That was his armor, to be invisible by perfection. But invisibility was never total. In the cafeteria, he noticed glances that lingered too long, a foreman's eyes that followed him from the corner, whispers that stopped when he entered the room. Berlin was a nest of suspicion. Trust could kill you faster than bullets. Elsa appeared again after a week's silence. It was at dusk during a brief lull in the bombings. She walked into the cafe near Alexanderplatz as if she belonged there, which, in a way, she did. Dressed in civilian gray, she looked like another tired bureaucrat after a long day of war work. "You shouldn't meet me here," Andrei murmured without looking at her. "Then it's a good thing I'm not here," she replied smoothly, sipping her coffee. "You're talking to no one." A smile ghosted across his face despite himself. She had that kind of confidence, the calm of someone who had already made peace with danger. "Your reports are good," she continued quietly. "Headquarters confirms the data you sent on the rocket fuel tests matches Allied intelligence. They're impressed." "That's not why I'm here," Andrei said. "The V2 designs are fragmented. I need access to Peenemünde, not the plants." Elsa leaned back. "That's impossible. Security there is tighter than at the Führer's bunker. Even high-ranking officers can't just walk in." "Then we'll find another way," he said. Her gaze sharpened. "We?" He met her eyes. "You're my contact. That makes us both expendable, or both essential." For a moment, her expression softened. "You sound like someone who's already chosen his end." Andrei said nothing. Outside, the sirens began again, and the cafe lights flickered. The war reminded them it was still listening. That night, Elsa brought him to a hidden basement beneath a shuttered bookstore in Kreuzberg. Inside, 3 others were waiting. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in workers' clothes. Their faces carried the hollow look of people who had seen too much and trusted too little. "This is the network," Elsa said. "We don't use names, only titles." She pointed to the first man, a thin, bespectacled figure with trembling hands. "This is the professor, former physicist. He worked at Peenemünde before being dismissed for questioning the use of forced labor."
The professor gave a brief nod. "If you're from the East, I assume you're not here for mercy." Andrei replied evenly, "I'm here for information." The second man, a factory foreman with scars on his knuckles, spoke next. "And we're here because information can kill faster than bombs." Elsa cut him off. "Enough. Our guest is trusted. He'll handle transmissions." She handed Andrei a folded map marked with coordinates. "These are storage sites for liquid oxygen and ethanol near Peenemünde. The Allies will bomb them if they have proof. Get the details confirmed. The professor has a contact inside who can help." Andrei studied the map. The lines, the numbers, everything seemed coldly mathematical until he noticed a name scribbled faintly on the margin. D. Holub. He froze. "Who wrote this?" The professor frowned. "That was my assistant, young man about your age, captured 2 years ago, then transferred north. He left this note before they took him." Andrei's voice went tight. "What was his first name?" The professor hesitated. "Danilo." The world tilted. The air in the basement turned heavy, unreal. For a moment, Andrei couldn't breathe. Elsa's eyes narrowed. "You know him." "My brother," Andrei whispered. That night, long after the meeting, Andrei sat by the radio with trembling hands. The sound of static filled the dark room like ocean waves. He tapped the key mechanically, but his mind was far away, back in the village, the day Danilo was taken. The memory was sharper than any photograph. Soldiers shouting in German, his brother's frightened eyes as they pulled him away. And now, after years of believing him dead, this fragile clue. He wanted to send a message to Moscow right then, to beg for permission to find him. But emotion was a weakness, and weakness meant exposure. So he buried it, like everything else. Over the next month, the network moved in silence. Andriy spent his days at the plant, his nights transmitting coded data to Moscow. Every transmission carried fragments, production rates, chemical formulas, train schedules. But the closer he got, the more dangerous it became. One morning, he arrived at work to find two men from the Gestapo waiting at the gate. Routine inspection, they said, their smiles thin as wire. They questioned him about his background, his travels, his acquaintances. He answered calmly, precisely. When one officer asked about his accent, he replied, "Berlin-born, but raised near Danzig. My mother was Prussian." They looked satisfied, or pretended to be. But when he left that day, he saw one of them trailing him in a reflection of a shop window. Elsa arranged another meeting, this time in the ruins of an old opera house. "Gestapo knows something," she said, voice low. "Someone's feeding them rumors about a foreign agent inside the technical sector. Do you know who?" She hesitated. "I have suspicions. The foreman, maybe. He's been drinking heavily, talking too much." Andriy clenched his fists. "If he talks, we're all dead." Elsa's expression was unreadable. "Then we do what the Gestapo does. Silence him before he silences us." The words chilled him, not because they were cruel, but because they were logical. That night, Andriy followed the foreman through the narrow back streets of Kreuzberg. The man staggered, half drunk, humming an old tune from before the war. He turned into a small alley near the canal and stopped to light a cigarette. Andriy stepped from the shadows. The man turned and saw not a coworker, but the truth behind the mask. His cigarette fell from his lips. You, he stammered. "You're not—" The shot was muffled, a whisper in the dark. Andriy caught the body before it hit the ground. He dragged it to the canal and watched it vanish beneath the black water. The ripples faded quickly, as if the night itself had swallowed the secret. When he returned, Elsa was waiting in the apartment, her eyes hollow. "Did you do it?" He nodded. She poured him a glass of vodka, her hands trembling slightly. "There's no glory in this work, Andreas, only ghosts." He drank in silence. Weeks passed, bombings intensified, food grew scarce. The city bled but refused to die. Andriy and Elsa continued their dangerous dance, sharing coded glances in public, trading secrets in whispers. Yet, beneath the duty, something else began to grow, something forbidden. One night, after another transmission, she stayed longer than usual. The room smelled of ozone and smoke. She stood by the window, watching the faint glow of fires across the city. "You ever think about what comes after?" she asked softly. "After the war?" "Yes." He hesitated. "I don't know if I'll survive to find out." She turned to him, her eyes bright with defiance. "Then make sure you do." For a moment, the silence between them was heavier than the bombs outside. Then she stepped closer, her breath warm against his cheek. "You carry too many ghosts, Andreas. Let at least one of them rest." He wanted to tell his real name then, to confess everything, the brother he'd lost, the life he'd buried. But instead, he said nothing. The war didn't allow confessions, only secrets. When she left, the faint smell of her perfume lingered in the air, something delicate and human in a world that had forgotten both. 2 days later, an Allied bombing raid hit the Siemens plant. The sky turned crimson as firebombs rained over Spandau.
Andri barely escaped, his coat scorched, his ears ringing. The next morning, he returned to the ruins to search for survivors. And there, among the debris, he found the professor's notebook, half burned, half intact. Inside were new coordinates labeled Project Stormvogel, Peenemünde, the target he'd been waiting for. But at the bottom of the page, scribbled hastily, was a single line in shaky handwriting. Danilo transferred, Hanover sector, Labor Camp 14B. Andri closed the book, his hands trembling. For the first time since the mission began, he felt something stronger than duty: hope.
The ruins of the Siemens plant still smoked when Andrea returned to his apartment. Ash clung to his coat like guilt. The bombing had erased half his cover, half his colleagues, and yet the mission went on. In Berlin, the living envied the dead for their peace. He placed the professor's burned notebook on the table. The coordinates for Project Stormvogel, the code name for the V2 test facilities, were still legible. But it wasn't the numbers that made his hands shake. It was the last scribbled line about Danilo. Labor Camp 14B, Hanover sector. He repeated it silently, as if saying it enough times could summon his brother from the dark. The thought of him alive filled Andrea with both hope and terror, because now, for the first time, he wanted something beyond the mission. Elsa arrived that evening, wrapped in a heavy coat, her face pale from the cold and exhaustion. She moved quickly, scanning the street before closing the door. "You shouldn't be here," Andrea said. "The Gestapo are still sweeping the factories." "They're not looking for me," she replied. "They're looking for you." He froze. "Your name was mentioned in an internal memo," she continued, pulling a folded paper from her sleeve. "Someone in the ministry suspects you of leaking information to neutral channels. They don't have proof yet, but they will." He took the paper and scanned it. His alias, Andreas Hahn, was underlined in red ink. Beside it, a single word: Überwachung, surveillance. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Not long," she said, "but there's a way out. The professor's contact in Peenemünde can arrange a pass for you to inspect the rocket test site. If you get there, you'll be beyond Berlin's net, at least for a few days." Peenemünde. He looked down at the notebook again. "That's where the data is. The production, the range, the engineers. If we can get that, Moscow can destroy the entire program." Elsa nodded. "Exactly. But once you go north, you can't return. The Gestapo will close in here." He met her gaze. "Then we finish what we started." The next night, they boarded a military freight train headed north under the cover of darkness. The car smelled of fuel and cold metal. Andreas' forged papers listed him as an engineer assigned to rocket propulsion review, while Elsa traveled as his secretary. Outside, the frozen plains of northern Germany stretched endlessly, broken only by the occasional flare of anti-aircraft fire. Inside, silence. Only the rhythmic clatter of wheels on rails and the low hum of war machinery echoing through the night. At dawn, the train crossed the Baltic coast. The landscape turned barren: marshes, pines, concrete bunkers. Ahead loomed the Peenemünde complex, shrouded in mist and barbed wire, the birthplace of the Reich's wonder weapons. When they disembarked, an officer from the SS welcomed them with forced politeness. "Welcome, Herr Hahn. We've been expecting the inspector from Berlin." Andreas' heart pounded, but his face showed nothing. He handed over his documents with surgical precision. The officer barely skimmed them before nodding. "Follow me." Elsa's eyes met his briefly. They both knew, from this moment on, a single mistake meant death. The facility stretched for kilometers,
Hangars, laboratories, and underground chambers carved into the coast. Workers moved like ants beneath floodlights, building death machines with mechanical devotion. As they walked, Andreas noted every structure, every guard post, every fuel line. His mind worked faster than his fear. The SS officer gestured toward a massive assembly hall. "Here is where we complete the V2. Soon, these rockets will bring London to its knees." Elsa feigned admiration. "Incredible! Such precision!" "Yes," the officer said proudly. "When we perfect the guidance system, no city will be beyond our reach." Andreas forced a thin smile, hiding the nausea twisting his stomach. Inside the hall, hundreds of laborers, men and women from occupied countries, moved in silence under guard. Their faces were hollow, eyes vacant. Among them, Andreas saw flashes of Slavic features, whispers of Ukrainian, Polish, Russian. For a moment, he thought he saw Danilo, a young man with the same dark hair, the same tilt of the jaw. But when their eyes met, the stranger turned away. Still, something inside him cracked. That night, in a storage bunker, Andrei set up his portable transmitter. The hum of the generator masked the faint clicks of Morse code as he sent his report. Target identified. Rocket site located. Request airstrike coordinates. Confirmation required. Gray shadow. He waited. The static hissed for a long minute before Moscow replied. Confirmation received. Strike authorized. Exfiltrate before 14 May. 4 days. That was all the time he had. Elsa entered quietly, her face lit only by the dim bulb. "You sent it?" He nodded. "Then we're ghosts already," she said softly. "Once that message reaches London, this place will burn." Andrei looked at her, really looked. The scar on her cheek caught the light, a faint reminder of pain long buried. "You've done this before, haven't you?" She hesitated. "I helped the resistance in Prague before they executed my fiancé. After that, I swore I'd make every bullet count." "Then why stay in Germany?" "Because someone has to destroy it from within," she said. He admired her in that moment, not for her courage, but for her quiet resolve. It was the kind of strength that didn't need applause. The next day, while inspecting the rocket testing field, Andrei saw an opportunity and a danger. A truck convoy was unloading parts near a restricted zone. Guards shouted orders, and among them he recognized a familiar face. Thin, pale, eyes sunken, but unmistakable. Danilo. Andrei's world stopped. He wanted to run to him, to shout his name, to tear the rifle from the nearest guard. But he couldn't. The slightest outburst would destroy everything. He forced himself to keep walking, heart hammering so hard he thought it would break through his ribs. That night, he told Elsa. "He's here," he said, his voice trembling. "My brother. I saw him." She froze. "You're sure?" "I'd know him anywhere." Elsa's face darkened. "Then you can't go near him." "I have to get him out." "No," she said sharply. "If you do, you'll kill both of you and the mission. The strike is coming. You have 4 days." Andrei slammed his fist on the table. "I don't care about the mission." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, she spoke, her tone calm but cold. "You care enough to have survived this long. Don't throw it away now." He turned away. "You wouldn't understand." "I understand better than you think," she said quietly. "I lost everyone I loved to this war. You don't save them by dying beside them." He said nothing. When she left, she didn't close the door. The following night, Andrei slipped out of his quarters and made his way toward the labor camp adjacent to the testing field. The guards were distracted by preparations for a rocket launch. The sky flickered orange with reflected flames. He moved through the shadows, each step timed with the distant roar of engines. When he reached the wire fence, he saw him again. Danilo, thinner than memory, howling crates under a guard's whip. "Danilo," Andri hissed. The boy froze, eyes wide, then slowly turned. For a second, disbelief crossed his face. "Andri?" They stared at each other through the fence, years of loss collapsing into a single heartbeat. But before they could speak again, a searchlight swept across the yard. Shouts erupted, alarms blared. Andri ducked behind a truck, heart racing. He saw guards running, rifles raised. One of them struck Danilo with the butt of his weapon, shouting orders. Andri reached for his pistol, but stopped. To act now meant suicide. To wait meant betrayal. He bit down on his lip until he tasted blood. Then, slowly, he slipped back into the darkness. At dawn, the test launch began. From the observation tower, Andri and Elsa watched as the first V2 roared to life. A column of fire split the sky, shaking the earth beneath them. The officers applauded. Elsa leaned close and whispered, "You saw him, didn't you?" Andri didn't answer. She continued, voice trembling, "If you try to save him, you'll destroy everything. But if we finish the mission, if we succeed, then none of this will happen again. No more camps, no more Danilos." He stared at the smoke trail fading into the clouds. "You sound like someone trying to convince herself." "Maybe I am," she said. That night, Andri prepared his final transmission. The coordinates for the V2 site were complete. The message was short, precise, deadly. Target locked. Peenemünde. Strike imminent. Gray shadow end. As he sent the last signal, the transmitter sparked. For a heartbeat, he thought he heard an echo, a faint voice buried in static, like a whisper from another life. Then the connection died. The air raid came 2 nights later. All-eyed bombers roared over the coast, dropping waves of fire on the complex. The sky turned into a sea of light and thunder. Explosions tore through hangars and fuel depots. The world burned. Andri and Elsa ran through the inferno, searching for cover. Screams, sirens, collapsing steel, all blurred into chaos. Through the smoke, Andri saw the labor camp. The barracks were on fire. Prisoners ran in every direction, guards shooting blindly. "Danilo!" he shouted, breaking away. Elsa tried to grab him, but he was already gone. He sprinted through the burning yard, calling his brother's name. Then, amid the flames, he saw him, on the ground, bleeding, trying to crawl toward the fence. Andri fell to his knees beside him. Danilo looked up, eyes dim but alive. "You found me," he whispered. "I'm here," Andri said, clutching his hand. "We're going home." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. The fire was too close, the bombs too many. Danilo smiled faintly. "Tell them, we fought." Then he was gone. Andri sat there, cradling his body, until Elsa pulled him away as the next wave of bombs fell. Hours later, the two of them stumbled through the ruins of what had been Peenemünde. The facility was gone, burned to ash. The mission was a success, but victory tasted like dust. Andri looked at the horizon, his face blank, his heart hollow. Elsa touched his arm. "We have to move. They'll be searching for survivors." He nodded slowly. "Then let's disappear."
They reached Berlin 3 weeks after Peenemunde's destruction. The city was a graveyard of smoke and whispers, scarred buildings leaning like tired soldiers, streets filled with rubble and suspicion. Andri and Elsa had escaped through the forests, following resistance routes marked only by memory. They changed trains, names, and faces until even the night seemed to forget them.
But Berlin remembered. The Gestapo had posted new lists. One of the names, Andreas Hahn, appeared again, this time marked Verräter, traitor. They took refuge in a bombed-out boarding house near Friedrichstrasse. The owner, a quiet widow named Frau Klein, accepted their forged papers without question. She had learned long ago that in wartime, questions were dangerous things. For the first few days, they barely spoke. The silence between them was filled with ghosts. Danilo, the professor, the faces of the dead from Peenemünde. Then, one night, Elsa broke the quiet. "I heard something," she said. "The Gestapo captured someone from the ministry, your contact. They say he confessed before they shot him." Andri's stomach turned to ice. What did he say? That the spy known as Grey Shadow survived the bombing and returned to Berlin. He stared at her. "Then it's only a matter of time." She nodded. "We can still run. Prague, maybe, or Zurich. We could disappear." He looked out the window at the bombed city glowing red in the distance. Disappear? After all this? Her voice softened. "You don't have to die for ghosts." He turned to her. "I already did." Days passed. Rumors spread that the Allies were closing in from the west, the Soviets from the east. The Reich was dying, but it wasn't going quietly. One afternoon, while searching for food, Andri noticed a black car parked near the corner. Gestapo. 2 men smoking, eyes on the building. He returned upstairs calmly. "They've found us." Elsa froze. "How?" "Doesn't matter. We have to move." They gathered what little they had. Papers, a pistol, the damaged transmitter. But as they reached the back door, footsteps echoed in the hallway. "Go," he whispered. "I'll hold them." "No," she said firmly. "We move together." The door burst open. 2 agents entered, pistols raised. "Andreas Hahn, step away from the woman." Andre lifted his hands slowly, buying time. Elsa's eyes darted toward the window, a narrow escape to the alley below. For 2 days he moved through the dying city, hunted and half-starved. Every corner was a trap, every face a threat. But the mission burned inside him like a last heartbeat. Finally, he reached the outskirts, an abandoned radio post near Tempelhof. The equipment was old, but it worked. He set up the transmitter, trembling from exhaustion. "Grey Shadow reporting. Berlin compromised. Peenemünde destroyed. New site in Bavaria. Request strike. Code Elsa." He waited. Static filled the air, broken only by the sound of artillery in the distance. Then, at last, a reply. "Message received. Operation confirmed. Godspeed." He smiled faintly. Then, the door burst open. 3 Gestapo soldiers entered, rifles aimed. "Hands up!" Andrea turned slowly, still smiling. "You're too late." Part V, the last transmission. They dragged him to a cell beneath Prinz Albrechtstrasse, the Gestapo's headquarters. The walls were cold stone, the air heavy with fear. Interrogations blurred into one another. Questions, blows, silence. He said nothing. But one morning, the officer in charge, Oberst Müller, entered with a folder. "You're a difficult man to kill, Herr Hahn. Or, should I say, Grey Shadow." Andrea stared at him, expressionless. Müller opened the folder, revealing a photograph. Elsa, dead, her face serene. "The woman was a traitor, like you. The Reich cleanses itself of such filth." Andrea's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Müller smirked. "You see, we already know about Peenemünde. What we want to know is who else you told." He leaned closer. Tell me, and I might let you live." Andrea looked up, eyes calm, almost pitying. "You've already lost, Oberst. You just haven't realized it yet." Mueller's smile faded. He struck him across the face. "Take him away." That night, as the guards dragged him toward the execution yard, Berlin shook under another bombing raid. Sirens wailed. The ground trembled. Andrea stumbled, but kept walking. Outside, the sky burned red. The officer raised his pistol. "Any last words?" Andrea looked up at the inferno over Berlin and said quietly, "Freedom doesn't die with men." The shot rang out, drowned by the thunder of collapsing stone. Weeks later, when Soviet troops entered Berlin, they found the Gestapo archives in ruins. Most files were destroyed, but one survived. A single transmission record labeled "Gray Shadow, Final Report." It was sent from Berlin the night before the airstrike on Bavaria, the one that destroyed the Reich's last rocket facility. No one ever discovered who Gray Shadow really was. Some said he was a Soviet agent. Others claimed he worked for the British. But in the rubble of Berlin, among the ruins of hate, a small plaque was later found scratched into a wall. "For those who fought without names, for those who never returned, for Elsa."